Hi, Shada. Thank you so much for joining us today on The Europeans. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
This week, one of the questions we're trying to answer is why is the EU not placing real pressure on Israel? We'll get to what they could be doing in a bit, but as someone who has been following EU affairs closely for many years, why do you think the EU has been so timid in its response?
So the easy answer that comes to mind, of course, is it's our historical guilt, and our internal divisions, 27 member states with different histories and connections to Israel, different composition of their populations obviously are divided on this issue. So that's the easy answer. But there's also another question that I think we need to look at. That's our close business ties. This is a very profound economic, business-oriented relationship. There's a lot of trade going on, billions of dollars of trade. Israel is a huge market for our scientific products, our tech products, and for our arms. So there's a lot of complicated issues. When I've sort of looked at it, because as you know, I also look at anti-racism, our colonial past, our migration policies, our development policies, and I've been doing that very, very consistently over the last almost 25 years. So there's a lot of connections, and you need to join the dots, really, Dominic, because the way we're treating Palestinian lives are seen as expendable. We're at figures that are absolutely out there, skyrocketing every single day. You open our phones, our computers, and the numbers are going up of children and women as well. So what I'm saying is the same kind of racism that people of color face in Europe, when you're brown or black or Muslim, you are considered to be secondary citizens. There's always a lot of stigma, and you only have to read the Fundamental Rights Agency's report on being black in Europe, being Muslim in Europe, being Jewish in Europe. There's a lot of discrimination there. And I see the same kind of dehumanization and the same kind of us and them mindsets and this feeling of Western superiority when you're looking at the Arab world or Palestine or Asia or Africa. And connecting those dots makes it clear to me that the same kind of racism and colonial hangovers that sort of, influence our policies, whether it's foreign policy, development policy, are very much there when you're looking at why the EU has been so slow in responding and, not really responded to what's happening in Palestine compared to what's happening in Ukraine, which is equally terrible and equally horrific. So where's that difference coming from? And my research has shown that it really is based on racism and looking at the Arab world, the Muslim world as somehow inferior and less human. And that comes from our colonial past, of course.
Do you see any signs that the EU is starting to confront this structural racism that you described?
So, to be frank, their attempts have been made. After the Black Lives Matter and the killing of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, the EU came up with what I thought was a very, very important and groundbreaking anti-racism action plan. And that recognized, Dominic, very importantly, structural racism. So this was not just about the awful individuals, the bigots among us, the rotten apples in our cart, but this was about institutionalized, systemic racism. And that was important, right? But what that paper did not do is actually come up with the measures that are needed to tackle that. And one of the most important measures is studying our history. Recognizing how colonialism and the horrors, especially if you're living in Belgium as I am, the horrors of Leopold II and all the rest of it, our colonial policies are impacting on this structural racism. A lot of studies have been done, Dominic, but that action plan falls short on that. They're trying to revise that action plan, and I'm really hoping that history, the right kind of history, is taught in our schools. So our younger people are conscious of this hangover that we carry with us, this burden of colonialism that we carry with us without even knowing about it. There's something called unconscious bias. Well, that's it. That's where it comes from.
Shada, and as someone from Eastern Europe, I live in Poland. I have to say, I appreciate that Europe's reaction to the war in Ukraine. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't something we would dream of, but still I think it was pretty strong given all the constraints you mentioned. But, call me naive, but I was genuinely really taken aback by the lack of reaction in the case of, the Israel aggression on Gaza. Were you also surprised by how inactive the EU was as an institution?
Shocked and felt very betrayed. Really, that sense of betrayal, that sense of being let down, because as a European, adopted European, somebody who came here when I was 18, and I just, love Europe, and I admired Europe, and I was inspired by Europe and the history of, nations coming together. Obviously, I knew about the colonial history, but I thought modern day Europe was moving ahead, and it was for a very long time. It was inspiring. And all of the values that Europe was setting out as being crucial and core to its being, human rights, human dignity, rule of law, international law. These were important things, but I've seen this unravel over the years, right? So I would say that for me, the defining moment where Europe's feet of clay were visible was after 9/11, where there was suddenly this surge in Islamophobia that, it never was that strong before. Of course, there was discrimination against guest workers and racism, but that it was at an epic scale, right? I mean, it had to be dealt with. And over the years, the last 20, 25 years, I've seen just how our migration policy, our dealing on development conversations, our humanitarian reactions are just colored by I really don't want to say that all of us are racist, but it's structural. It's something that we're not even sometimes conscious of. And I'm very aware that there is a huge anti-racist movement. I'm part of it. And I'm so impressed by people who are, setting their, putting their heads out there on this issue. But on Gaza, I mean, it was very quickly said, when Ukraine, we were talking about how the people who were suffering were white and had blue eyes, and, they were our people, and they were welcomed, rightly so, open arms. And at the same time, people who were fleeing famine, civil wars, arriving in Europe was basically told to go back, not welcome. So this contrast, this double standard, I think has been a source of betrayal to many of us who really believed in Europe. And Gaza has laid that, has laid it out bare, it's out there. You can't run away from it. You can't hide and say, no, this is just a coincidence. This is not about racism.
Josep Borrell, the EU's foreign policy chief up until last year, he's described EU leaders as complicit in Israel's crimes. Do you agree with that assessment?
Oh, absolutely. I do. I wish Borrell had said that earlier because he has gravitas. He had a voice when he was part of the European Commission, the High Representative. I know because I know people around him that he was very reluctant about certain things that he was asked to say. He was always very uncomfortable and easy. But I'm going to be very frank. I think he should have resigned, and I'm disappointed he didn't do so. But I'm happy that he's coming out. I mean, Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, has come out. Irish ministers have come out. The Slovenians have come out. We're 2 years into the genocide. All of this could have been, in a sense, prevented if the EU had lived up to its values, lived up to the Article number 2 in the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which is about complying with human rights standards, And we've always found excuses for Israel's destruction and devastation of Palestine, of Gaza, its moves, its violence in the West Bank. We're always finding excuses, and we're gullible, that's the word, when Israel says, oh yeah, you're going to send our food aid in, and we're going to comply with human rights standards. We're gullible. We're accepting Israel's lies and hypocrisy about this issue. But more than that, under the rules of the EU Association and EU relations with many countries, human rights violations are cause for suspension of that agreement. Well, we haven't done that. We should stop trade. Our trade keeps the Israeli economy afloat, which keeps the Israeli military machine afloat. We haven't done that. Our exports of arms, sophisticated arms, are continuing, even though Germany now says, is going to stop a few. But I mean, all of this is really, I think, just a smokescreen. And our scientific cooperation, this is so important, Dominic, because Israel is a high-tech giant, right? And we're collaborating with that on many issues like face recognition and, targeted killings are part of that. So we're complicit. Yes, we are complicit. We're complicit because we're gullible. We're complicit because it's really business as usual. We're not listening to the International Court of Justice. We're not complying with the International Criminal Court when it says that, indicted, suspected war criminals should not be visiting Europe. I am, I'll just say, I am shocked that we are so blatantly ignoring and shrugging off our obligations, domestic obligations under our treaties and our international obligations in international conventions.
Although I suspect if Netanyahu visited Ireland or Spain, he would be arrested, don't you think? I mean, I know he visited Hungary and it was, of course, Orban let him get away with it.
I think he would be. So I don't think he will visit, and I don't think there'll be any invitations coming from there either.
I live in the Netherlands, a country which is the biggest financial investor in Israel of all EU countries, and where we had, up until recently, a very pro-Israel right-wing government. That's now crumbled, and we have this caretaker government whilst we await elections. But even here, with this very right-wing caretaker government, that caretaker government is now also calling for the suspension of trade between the EU and Israel, along with the Swedish foreign minister. It feels like there is a shift happening right now. Do you sense that too?
Oh, absolutely. There's a shift happening. And, I have very close personal connections with the Netherlands. I live partly in Amsterdam, actually. And I'm impressed. Casper Weldekamp did something that was very brave, very courageous and very moral. And I think, people were surprised because of what you've said, because the Netherlands has traditionally, along with Germany, sort of been the ally, the best ally in Europe of Israel. But that just shows how deep it has gone in terms of actually violating some of the principles that we've been talking about. And I say bravo to Casper, well done. We're seeing the same thing now, of course, in, other countries that have always stood by Israel. But it's late. It's really too late. I wrote a piece for the EU Observer in early November where I said, look, the only thing that would salvage Europe's reputation, but also stop the genocide, is if our countries break away from this collective EU impasse. We're never going to get anywhere with the collective sort of action. We have to work together in clusters, join other groups or act unilaterally. That piece, now people are beginning to say, yes, that's the way forward. But it was so open. It was so obvious to me. Anyone who knows geopolitics knows that, Germany will never, unless things really change dramatically, agree to suspending Israel for historical reasons. So I think, there is a shift. And frankly, I'm proud of that shift because I think it's coming from the people. I think if our Europeans were not out in the streets every single weekend or day, taking initiatives, dockers not loading ships, the aid flotilla that is on its way, from 40 countries to Gaza with food aid, breaking the siege. If there weren't that kind of public sort of demonstrations of courage and bravery, and enough is enough, really. Frankly, I don't think our governments will be moving. Some would. I think some would still. I think Spain, Slovenia, Ireland would have done this anyway because their voices have been strong from the beginning. Belgium, too, under the previous government. Now, apparently, they're moving towards this, too. And I think that wouldn't have happened. So this really is a profound and deep vision and version, interpretation of democracy. Now, of course, if you listen to the Hasbara, to the Israeli advocacy machine, this is all because Muslims are putting pressure on our European governments. Well, I've just written a piece that says that I wish that were true. I mean, it would be wonderful if Muslims in Europe had such geopolitical power, if we could influence. It would be great if Europe's minorities were that powerful. We're not. There are some people who are, but generally, people are still looked at as outsiders. And, and that, all Muslims are Hamas loving and all that rest of nonsense. I mean, complete and utter nonsense, laughable, but destructive. But there is change, Dominic, to come back to your question. And I'm proud, very proud of that change. It's the people.
I would like to ask you a bit of a personal question. You started off by saying, by describing the hardships of being a Muslim person living in Europe. So I wanted to ask you, how do you feel the perception of European Muslims changed since October 7th? And has it changed the way you feel about yourself in Europe?
So I have to say, I still love Europe. I still feel at home in Europe. I am privileged. I have always felt that this is my home. I'm one of those so-called integrated Europeans, but now there's suspicion cast on us as well because we're seen as integrated, but basically unchanged, which is absolute, once again, it's this kind of Islamophobic trope that is gathering momentum. I still feel at home here. This is my home. I'm not going to be going anywhere. I'm not going to stop talking about Gaza, about Palestine. And there are so many people here who are not Muslims, who are Jewish, who are Buddhists, who are Hindus, who are Christians, who are in the same place. So I think there has been a change. There's been a spike in anti-Semitism, we know, because, there's an equation of anti-Israel feeling with anti-Jewish feeling, which is completely wrong. And, Jewish scholars say that is a very bad road to go down. And there's been a spike in Islamophobia as well. There's been an increase in Islamophobia. And I've been saying from day one of Gaza that it behoves our leaders to bring communities together. But hey, what have they been doing? They've been dividing with their divisive language, making things worse. So I think it is a difficult time in many ways to be Jewish in Europe and in many, many ways to be European Muslim at the moment as well. But I think once again, allyship is important. So, we're all together to try and end this genocide. And I see so much solidarity, really. Every time I publish something or I speak out or, I've been doing this for 2 years now. A lot of people send me hate messages, but my God, how much support I get. How many people come to me and say, thank you for saying that. So our Europe is still a very profoundly solidarity-oriented continent. And it's the people.
Well, I think that's a good way to round up this interview. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shada. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.